I was sitting on the sofa, scrolling through my phone, pretending not to notice him. The air felt heavy, charged with something unspoken. He was across the room, fixing a broken cabinet, but I could feel his presence like a storm waiting to break. I wasn't sure why I had agreed to let him stay longer than needed, but deep down, I think I knew. The first time I met him, he was just the handyman, someone my husband had hired to do odd jobs around the house. But there was something about him, the way he moved, confident but not arrogant, and those eyes. They lingered a second too long when they met mine, and it felt like they could see every secret I was trying to keep. I didn't want to admit it, even to myself, but I liked the way he looked at me. It wasn't polite or indifferent, like my husband's gaze had become. No, this was different. It was raw, and it terrified me how much I wanted it. That day, when he came over to finish some repairs, I made sure I was dressed casually, but not too casually. A loose blouse, shorts that might have been a little too short. I told myself it didn't mean anything, but when he walked in, I saw the flicker in his expression, the way his eyes drifted for just a moment before snapping back to mine. He noticed, and that sent a thrill down my spine I couldn't ignore. I tried to focus on my phone as he worked, but my mind was racing. Every sound he made, tools clinking, footsteps crossing the room, felt amplified. I was hyper-aware of him, of how close he was, and then it happened. He asked me for help. Just a simple thing, holding a board in place while he secured it. But when I stood next to him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body, my hands trembled. I hoped he didn't notice, but of course he did. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low, almost teasing. "Yeah, fine," I replied, but my voice betrayed me. His hand brushed against mine as he reached for a tool, and it was like an electric current shot through me. I pulled away too quickly, and he looked at me with a smirk, as if he knew exactly what was going through my head. I sat back down on the sofa, trying to regain my composure, but it was no use. The tension in the room was unbearable, and I knew I wasn't imagining it. "Mind if I take a break?" he asked, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "Sure," I said, pretending to be indifferent. He sat down on the armchair across from me, his shirt slightly damp from the work. I couldn't stop myself from looking, just for a second. But it was enough for him to notice. "You've been watching me," he said, his tone casual but laced with something dangerous. "No, I haven't," I shot back, too quickly. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and gave me a look that made my heart race. "You sure about that?" I should have told him to leave right then and there. I should have stood up, walked away, anything but what I did next. I held his gaze. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence was deafening, but the tension was louder. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears as he stood up and crossed the room. He stopped a few feet away, close enough to feel his presence but far enough to give me the chance to end this. I didn't. "You don't have to say it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can see it." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "See what? You want this as much as I do." I should have said no. I should have told him to leave. But instead I sat there frozen as he took another step closer. "You're married," he said, almost to himself, as if he was trying to talk himself out of it. But his actions betrayed him. "Then stop," I whispered, but my voice was weak, and we both knew it. He knelt in front of me, his hands resting on either side of the sofa. His face was so close to mine that I could feel his breath. "Tell me to go," he said, "and I will." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. I hated myself for it, but I didn't want him to go. His hand brushed against my knee, and every rational thought I had disappeared. I knew this was wrong, so wrong, but I couldn't stop. I don't know how long it lasted. Minutes? Hours? Time felt irrelevant as the line between right and wrong blurred and then disappeared completely. When it was over, I sat there staring at the floor, unable to process what had just happened. He stood up, adjusted his shirt, and grabbed his tools without saying a word. At the door, he paused. "This doesn't have to mean anything," he said, "unless you want it to." And then he was gone. I sat on the sofa for what felt like an eternity, replaying every moment in my head, every decision that had led to this. Guilt and exhilaration warred within me, and I didn't know which would win. When my husband came home that evening, I acted like nothing had happened, but inside I was a mess. I told myself it was a one-time thing, a mistake I wouldn't repeat. But I couldn't stop thinking about him. For days I told myself it was over, that what happened with him was a lapse in judgment, a fleeting mistake I could bury and forget. But the truth was far more complicated. I couldn't stop thinking about him, about the way he looked at me, the way he made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. Every time I sat on that sofa, I was reminded of him. The memory lingered like a ghost, and no matter how hard I tried to suppress it, it was always there. My husband, oblivious to the storm raging inside me, went about his routine as if nothing had changed. And then he came back. It was late afternoon when I heard the doorbell. My heart raced as I opened the door, praying it wasn't him, but also secretly hoping it was. And there he was, standing on the doorstep, holding a toolbox and wearing that same calm, confident expression. "Forgot a tool last time," he said casually, but the way his eyes locked onto mine told a different story. I should have closed the door. I should have told him I couldn't do this again, but instead, I stepped aside and let him in. He walked past me, his presence as commanding as ever, and headed toward the room he had worked in before. I followed him, my heart pounding, unsure of what to say or do. When he turned around to face me, the air between us felt electric. Neither of us spoke for a moment, the silence heavy with unspoken words. "I can't stay long," he said, but there was a glint in his eye that betrayed his intentions. "You shouldn't have come back," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Maybe not," he replied, stepping closer. "But you didn't stop me." My mind screamed at me to push him away, to end this before it spiraled even further out of control. But my body betrayed me, drawn to him like a moth to a flame. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, his touch sending a shiver down my spine. "Tell me to leave," he said again, his voice low and intense. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out, and then it happened again. This time, it wasn't a hesitant exploration of boundaries, but a complete surrender. Every ounce of guilt and fear melted away, replaced by something raw and undeniable. When it was over, we sat in silence, both of us knowing there was no going back. "I'll leave," he said, standing up and gathering his things. "But if you call me, I'll come back." And then he was gone, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the weight of what we'd done. Days turned into weeks, and I tried to move on, to convince myself that I could forget him. But the truth was, I didn't want to. I found myself replaying every moment we'd shared, craving the excitement and danger he brought into my life. Then one day, my husband mentioned hiring him again. "A broken faucet," he said. I froze, unsure of how to respond. "Are you okay?" he asked, noticing my reaction. "Yeah, just tired," I lied, forcing a smile. When the day came for him to return, I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. I knew this was my chance to put an end to it once and for all, or to let it consume me completely. When he arrived, our eyes met, and I knew there was no denying it anymore. This wasn't just a mistake or a fleeting attraction. This was something deeper, something I couldn't control. As he worked, I sat on the sofa, pretending to be engrossed in a book. But my mind was elsewhere, every nerve in my body aware of his presence. Finally, he set down his tools and walked over to me, his expression unreadable. "Are you going to keep pretending this doesn't mean anything?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. I closed the book and looked up at him, my heart pounding. "I don't know what this is," I admitted, "but I can't stop." "Then don't," he said simply, holding out his hand. And for the first time, I didn't resist.